We have 2 thumbs up. That must mean Siskel and Ebert are back in business. Very nice.
You can use that one as the key if you want.
Yeah, I know. It looks very good. And you can even read it. That's better than my. Wow. I have 3 handwritings. If I'm writing a thank you note to a donor, I draw every letter. It takes me forever to write a sentence. If I'm writing it and then my second one is down, if I hope that somebody else can read it, that's faster, but it's somewhat legible. And then there's my writing for myself. And most people can't read that. And all my college notes and all my seminary notes and all my notes ever since then, I can read that like typewriter. I can still read my college notes for the most part. But it's, yeah, I don't know. Each generation, it seems like handwriting gets worse in our family. And the funny thing is my handwriting looks a lot today like my father's did. And my son's, my older son is, well, it's just as bad as mine.
Same way too.
Do what?
His typing looks about the same too.
No, well, see, I type at 500 words a minute with 3,000 mistakes. The backup key that was created for me. Yeah, there's no letters on it anymore. Okay, let's pass those in. This idea of the different worldviews. What is a pre-scientific worldview? What is that?
You get your sense of reality or truth from tradition.
Okay. Okay, and what might some of those things be? What would the Enlightenment people call them? superstitions, maybe, or and when things happen, what causes things to happen in a pre-scientific worldview? Sure, sure. And is some of that accurate? Is there real evil? Are there forces of evil? Yeah, I learned more about that in this neighborhood than I ever wanted to know. But
Woman in Burnsville that made like 180,000 this year just from selling people not to get a hex. You'll get a hex from me, and your life will be cursed if you don't bring in this much money. She doesn't have a job, but she's made like 180 this year. Extortion, basically.
yep, true believers born every minute. Okay, and then the scientific or the post-enlightenment worldview, what's that?
Science is the rule of law.
Okay,
Based off of
reason. Now, is that bad? No. Going way back to the philosopher of Kant, the church wrestled with, how are we going to have a metaphysic? How are we going to understand spiritual things, things we can't see? And so he wrote his Prolegomena Any Future Metaphysic and all those things that his students then waited till they came out in English so that they could read them, because in German they were so terrible. But this was a struggle, and but of course it's also given us the laws of science, which are recognized by reason, and that's it is somewhat limited. And then what's a postmodern worldview?
truth is discovered through experience by the individual.
Okay. And how is it different from the other two? No absolutes. Yeah, can't see that in society, but okay. Yeah, yes, you can. Anyway,
More individualistic?
sure. At least in the American culture, but that spreads worldwide as well. And so you can believe anything, and if you take a look on Facebook of all of the different stuff, of the political stuff that goes on, and Q and all the weird things. Well, anyway, okay. Misattributions, another extremely important concept. If there's 5 or 10 things you take out of this class for the year, that's one of the pieces that's going to be most important, because that's one of the things that causes problems, even between people in the same family. Let alone people of very drastically different cultures. Let's talk about a cultural one where husbands and wives do that all the time. Mind reading and guessing why did he miss my birthday or whatever, and mind reading doesn't work, and guessing what somebody means when they say something doesn't work, let alone when you're dealing with a cultural aspect. Okay, so give me an example of a misattribution. There were a bunch of them in there, and I'm sure we can all probably spend the rest of the night naming misattributions.
Someone making not making eye contact with you, and
Yep.
so then you generalize the whole population based on that
Yeah.
interaction, basically.
And that's true. We don't. Somebody doesn't make eye contact. We get.
If you're used to that,
Yeah.
you think that they're being disrespectful or something.
Many years ago, I knew a woman who just established eye contact with me the whole time we talked, just constantly. And I thought, am I being flirted with here? Am I being hit on? And so on. No, the person was hard of hearing, and she was lip reading. Anyway, I learned something there, but misattribution, big time, stupid Rolland, but anyway. Okay, misattribution happens all the time between cultures, and it happens both ways. And for example, if I was sitting talking to you in a group, say we're in a neighborhood meeting, and I sit, as I normally do, I get sore in one spot. So sometimes I'll sit like this, or sometimes I'll sit like this. Now, if I'm dealing with a Somali, Both of these would be extremely, extremely insulting because you don't show people the bottoms of your feet. People, now I just do that because my hips get sore and because my first grade teacher taught me the first day of reading, okay, children, now for reading Alice, Jerry, and Jip, make a little desk out of your leg and then put your book there. And since then, I've done that for now, 59 years, and it's very comfortable for me to sit like this. It's anyway, okay. And things may mean things to people that you don't understand. My wife has had thousands of Hmong children, both as a music teacher and then as a classroom teacher. And one day, a little boy of a non-Hmong culture, these are second graders, took his scissors out, and there was this girl with beautiful long dark hair, and he just snipped off one little piece. Okay, I know kids are going to be kids. My dad probably dipped little girls, ponytails or whatever pigtails into the inkwells and so forth, but it's not like that. It's not just that. Among the traditional Hmong people, you don't cut little girls' hair. In fact, it's part of their spirit is cut away. And the mother came the next morning, and they were very new, refugees, spoke almost no English, and she wanted that hair back because that was a part of her little girl, and her little girl would be missing part of one of her spirits if that hair wasn't found. Well, the hair was dumpstered a long time before that, and so, and who would think that just a little bit of, if I had a pretty little girl and her hair was cut by some little jerk second grader, I'd probably, or I don't know, I never had a girl, so. And the boys did it to themselves. All right, good. Those are the okay, and you all know that you want to be learning about culture. And we're going to talk tonight about cultural areas that are compatible or incompatible with Christianity. And we're going to be looking at that and how we approach culture ourselves in our own faith relationship, our own faith background. Now, last week, I talked about the history of Minnesota and the history of the Twin Cities. And some of your eyes glazed over. And I didn't hear any snoring, which was good. And Cheryl and I talked about it afterwards, and I said, did I go into too much detail? Because I love this stuff. And she said, yes. So I've been thinking about it all week as to why did I go into so much detail. But when you watch the exciting video from last week, you'll see that I show the routes of the ox carts which ran from 1820 till late 1880s when the railroad went through, and the fact that those ox cart trails became the basic routes of Highway 10, Highway 94, Highway 371. All of our major routes, our railroad routes, all followed those same routes that the Métis, mixed breed French Indian people that oh, that's hard on the machinery. How did that happen? Sorry about that. They chose these routes. They figured out for themselves that this is what they needed in order to get through points between Winnipeg and here. But they began, on the other side of the river, and those were better routes. But after about 30 years of using basically Highway 29, okay, they had to quit using Highway 29. Why? Well, it wasn't an interstate yet, and it wasn't under construction for once, but I-29, that route, straight drop down from Winnipeg, Winnipeg wasn't a fur post in that people from the area brought their furs into Winnipeg. Winnipeg was a fur post in that as people went halfway across Canada, they needed to replenish their supplies. Or if they're going out to the west in Canada, they needed to furnish their supplies. And they had an unending supply of buffalo, bison, and berries. Tremendous number of berries grow up there. Blueberries, Juneberries, chokecherries, etc. And those were important, mixed into the pemmican because they gave vitamins, especially vitamin C, that kept people alive. And so they did a lot of harvesting of buffaloes. We get in the 1850s, and the buffalo population's dropping down, and this is costing the Dakota, or the Sioux, greatly. And that's why they said, if we find you west of the river, you're dead. So, because of they'd overshot the buffalo in the 1840s, decided that we not only have I-29, but then all these other routes that we take all the time that go in at an angle up towards Winnipeg, and they were all discussed. You know, and so why is one town, why does nobody from this town shop over in this town? Because the freeway went through and there isn't a good route in between them anymore. Why is, why is St. Paul cut so greatly between, why is there no contact and a huge difference in prices and houses between Como Park, north of the railroad, and Frogtown, south of the railroad? Why? Why is there $75,000, $100,000 difference in the price of a bungalow? Well, because the railroad went through, and the railroad followed the route, the route made by the ox cart people. It followed the same basic route, and it went through there. And as the railroads went in there with all their shops, and when you've got railroads coming and dropping off cars, and they have to constantly be adding and subtracting, switching cars, you have to have about a half-mile wide area. There used to be something like 20, 25 railroad tracks, where Snelling is, or down in the area around Jackson and Dale. And so you couldn't get from this neighborhood to that neighborhood. Why? Because of ox carts. Why? Because of road. Why? Because of railroad. The railroad followed the same route. And so these things have shaped, as did policy, as did when the freeways came through. All these things. Transportation is the greatest shaper of cities. And what difference does that make in ministry? Well, because you've got to define, you've got to understand your neighborhood. You have to understand the area you're working in. And that may be an entire city, but most normally, if you're going to be working, you're going to be working with one ethnic group or one need in one place at one time. And you're going to see constant changes in the city. And they may be caused by something that was decided 120 years ago. And all of a sudden it pops up, comes to life. Is this making sense? That's why I took all that time to talk about all that stuff, because all these layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of decisions are here like, well, ghosts. But they're not ghosts because they pop up. And, why is that neighborhood different from this neighborhood? Well, because this was the line between those two neighborhoods for many, many, many years. And, why are there businesses all up and down Franklin, but there aren't on 22nd? Why are they on Lake Street and they're not on 28th? Why is that? Well, those are section lines, and those are the earliest roads, and so that's where the businesses got started. So then later, when zoning happened, they were zoned, and it just keeps repeating itself. 2 or 3 guys and a transit and a compass and a chain. Measured all this stuff out in 1854. You know where they started measuring? The southern border of Wisconsin. There are actually 3 different systems that collide in Minnesota, but the one for the Twin Cities comes off of it took me years to find that, by the way. Anyway, that's so all these things, decisions that somebody makes, will make a difference with people and people's lives and what's going on. How are the school district lines drawn? Why are they where they're at? Why does an elementary school to have people on this side of some magic dotted line and not that side? And how is this decided, and so forth? Okay, we will talk more about it, but that's why I take the time to teach you the history thing, because these things keep popping up all the time. History, decisions by all these decision makers, some of them dead for 75 years, but they just keep popping in. So as you learn the history, learn the people, learn the neighborhood, learn the power, learn this stuff, there's all this stuff that people run into and they can't get ministry done and they can't figure out why. Well, it's because of some dotted line on a bank's map that they said we're gonna give, mortgages on this side, but not that side, in 1941 or 1951. And so this housing on this side of that dotted line was allowed to rot, and it's worth a whole lot less, or it was torn down for some kind of government project. Over here, the housing was kept up because of their mortgages available. Just thousands of little things like that. And you'll learn it, but that's why you need to learn it. That's why you start running into this as soon as you start doing ministry. Why are there so many poor kids in this neighborhood and not over there? Okay. All right, we're going to get, does anybody have any questions or comments that were here for the history thing last week, or anything that didn't make sense? Anything that struck you as being particularly interesting that you didn't know before? I know I'm asking you to remember something, or
The trolley car buyouts. What was that guy's name who got paid off by the GM bus maker?
you had to ask me that, didn't you? And I know that name. It's a name that means something else. I can come up with it. Streetcar liquidation. Oh, it's right on the tip of my tongue.
As you're looking, can you share the context?
Okay. Minnesota, or the Twin Cities, by 1920, had the greatest streetcar system in the world. They built their own cars. A guy by the name of Lowry had built this thing, and he ran it at a profit until the Model T came out. And now the idea of subsidizing streetcars is, now that's there's no problem with that. We're subsidizing every ride, and it makes all kinds of sense. But back then they didn't. And so the streetcars couldn't make a lot of money, and so we had all the tracks, we had all the infrastructure, we had everything, and ran all the way from Lake Minnetonka to Stillwater Prison, a amusement park on both ends, and it was just allowed to be thrown away. And the guys that liquidated, the guy that was in charge of it, actually went to jail, and then he was pardoned by some of the folks who were the bigwigs of the day. I'll have to look that up. I'm not finding it right here. It should be able to find that. Just on the edge of my. Well, anyway, and so he took kickbacks from the GM bus division, and then he sold off all the copper wire, huge copper wire, and the metal from a lot of the tracks and so forth, and sold it to the junk dealers, and for like 5 cents on the dollar, and then the junk dealers gave him a personal kickback. So the guy became fabulously wealthy, destroyed the light rail system that now we're spending billions, it's with a B, to replace along the same lines. And by the way, the bus lines run on most of the same lines the streetcars did, because the apartments are built there, because that's where they're needed, and it just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. So, okay. Questions or comments? Hosanna. His name was, it was a version of Hosanna. That was his name. I'll find it. Okay, let's, how many groups do we have that are going to give presentations on what they found? Move your, or send your papers down to the end. And how many one person from each group raise your paw, will you please? Okay, so we got one group, two groups, three groups. Are you guys a group? Four groups? Five group, okay. All right, so then we will do this and we'll ask you to take about 10 minutes. And so, who wants to go first? Oh, let's just do it across the front. Zach, you're up. You guys will go this way and then that way, all right? Go for it. Yeah, probably is the easiest, yeah, because then we can put it on the tape too. Let's see, you probably, is it PowerPoint? Google Slides. Yep. So if we go down here to there, and then you can go there. Excellent, all these new fangled gizmos. Google Slides, wow. What won't they think up next? We can hook up an Apple. Yeah, I don't know if it'll record, but we'll all be able to see it. Okay. Or if we plug that into the other computer, if we plug that into the Mac.
So if you plug that computer into any of these computers, it won't show up on the back.
I mean, if we transfer that, are you using like PowerPoint or something? Okay. Google Drive? Okay. Oh, you can you can log in there. That'll be fine. Then we can put it on the tape for the two people. Hi there.
Hello.
The name's Schmedvig, Harlan Schmedvig. Yeah.
Long time no see. Well, the Bible study upstairs is going on a field trip tonight.
You are.
So you're it.
Is this like trick or treats?
Yeah.
Okay.
Birthday celebration.
Oh, all right. Well, we'll fold down the hort. Just for the sake of humanity here, I'm going to be bold and open up the cookies. I guess somebody did already. Okay. Iglesia Centro Cristiano de Minneapolis and Mercado Central.
Yeah, so we went to a couple of different places when we were doing our cross-cultural experience, and the first place we went to was actually here. We went to the service at Iglesia Centro Cristiano de Minneapolis. Upstairs at 11:30 is when they have their services, and then we went to Mercado Central down on Lake Street afterwards. Yeah, I can just click with the mouse. Do you want to talk?
All right, sure. So this is, it was actually their 21st anniversary of being a church. So this is Pastor Hoel speaking. They actually did a special missionary offering, so he's explaining that. We can go on. So this gives you a little idea of the size of the church. If you look at it right away, they may look very similar to us as outsiders. But as we talked to people afterwards, we found out that they actually represented a lot of different countries. So Mexico, Puerto Rico, Ecuador, Cuba, and then there were several gringos, not just us, but also spouses of certain congregation members. So they were actually a pretty diverse congregation.
So after the service, we got invited to. I mean, they were completely hospitable and totally welcoming the whole time. And we
Great
got,
church.
Yeah, we got invited down here where they were having their 21st anniversary feast, basically. And so they had a bunch of different foods, like they had corn tortillas and mole, and what was this? Was this chicken? I didn't eat any of that.
Yeah, so this is mole, and this is just refried beans and a salad.
And then they had this punch that we tried, and they had some very common types of drinks that we saw when we were at the Spanish grocery store last week, and this was Pastor Joel said, or maybe it wasn't Pastor Joel, it was someone that we were talking to, said that this was a pretty common Ecuadorian style of cake that was a strawberry peach cake, and it was super, super moist and really, really good. And some of our interactions that we had, we talked to a few different people. One of the guys that we actually talked to the most was actually Irish, and he married into a family at the church, right? And yeah, so we spent a lot of time talking to him, and he told us a lot about the church demographics. And it was a little bit easier for me to talk and listen to him because I understood more of what was going on because I don't speak a lot of Spanish. Yeah, do you want to talk about some of these other things?
Sure, yeah. Well, one thing, obviously it was easy to tell who the gringos were, but other than that, it was hard to tell, like I said, who was from what background, at least for us, from a outsider perspective. But from our perspective, it didn't seem like anyone was treated differently depending on their background. They were just really welcoming to all of us. They made sure to say that we were welcome to eat, and yeah, even before we left, the pastor Joel came up and greeted us and thanked us for coming. So we were just really impressed by the family feel of the service. And go on. So here's kind of some of our reflections. First of all, it's different than we were used to. It seemed like this church was more comfortable with what we would call chaos. Even an example of that was during the service, they paused to take a picture, and they had their entire congregation come up to the front. And Zach leaned over to me, and he's like, at my church, this would 100% happen after the service. And then another example, there was a little girl that just ran up and I think it was during the worship time, and she was just like running around the stage, and no one seemed like they were batting an eye, so you're like, okay, I guess this is more normal. But I already kind of commented on the next reflection, just that the whole church really seemed like a family, and even how they treated us like family. We loved the food, and I felt like the church was really good at being both missional. They had a missionary speaker, and he was talking about actually different people groups in Africa. So they were very, and then they had a mission offering for Thanksgiving meals for people who didn't have food over Thanksgiving. So they were very missional, but they were also really good at feeling like a family and taking care of themselves or each other within community. So I thought they had a really good balance of that.
So next, after church, we went to Mercado Central down on Lake Street, and I didn't have any rhyme or reason to how I took pictures, really. I just took a lot of pictures of things that sort of caught my eye, and this was just a whole wall that was covered in black T-shirts, and they had like a lot of these. Melissa was saying that a lot of these pictures come from like a Hispanic version of bingo or a Latino version of bingo, I guess, or something like that.
I think it's specifically from Mexico.
Okay, yeah. So that was that, and another thing that I noticed when we walked in, it didn't feel like a normal like grocery store or Western style store. Like if I walked into Target, everything was packed tightly together, and they had a whole bunch of accommodations that I wouldn't expect to find in like a store that I normally go to, and they were all packed into one store, and we'll show you more of that here in a minute. But they had a bakery section, and this was sort of a decoration for a quinceañera. It's a celebration of a girl's 15th birthday, I'm pretty sure.
Kind of like Sweet 16 for us, but like a way bigger deal.
A bigger deal, yeah.
Families who spend like close to a wedding amount of money, depending, even if like you're not that wealthy, like they'll save for years.
Yeah, and that picture too probably doesn't do this thing justice, because it was probably like this tall on me. I don't know. It was like huge. And that was in their bakery section. And then as far as the demographics go, as we were walking around the market, it was mostly Latino people. This was on a weekend afternoon. And we did see 3 or 4 pairs of gringos, and they were probably doing roughly the same thing that I was doing, which was looking around at like all the different stuff and sort of looking lost. But the other thing that we noticed, maybe I wrote this on a different slide, but I'll just say it now, was that when we did see Latino families or Hispanic families walking around, it was almost always in like whole large family groups, and there were very few like single people or individuals or even pairs of people walking around. It was like large groups of people that made it like a family outing, and it wasn't ever just like mom and the kids. It was always mom and dad and the kids. It was like the whole family, which was kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, so the last slide we had a picture of a Dia de los Muertos altar. So I know from studying a little bit of Latino culture, this is where they would build an altar for someone who's passed away, and then there's kind of a spiritual belief that that person will visit the altar on Dia de los Muertos. And then we saw this next picture. I know this is La Virgen de Guadalupe, which is one of the kind of an icon in Latino culture. I'm not sure if this has to do with Dia de los Muertos or if it's something else. We weren't really sure that we took a picture of it. This is an example. One of the things we noticed was that there were just a lot of services. Like if we would go into Walmart or whatever, we pretty much expect just retail. But was this a barber shop? Yeah, so in the same place there was a barber shop. We might have pictures of other things too. Okay, so here's a bakery as well. And we also saw some kind of psychologist office as well. So there was a lot of different social services. We kind of talked a little bit about some of the interactions, that being mostly in family units. Of course, since it was a store or a market, people were mostly there to shop. But we noticed people seemed like they were doing it at a more slower pace. Like I think if we would go to shop, we pretty much go in, get the stuff that we need, and leave. But people didn't seem like they were in a hurry. And their interactions towards us, they were cordial, but it didn't seem like they were overly welcoming or even like, I guess in American cultural experience, the shop owners really want to sell you something, so they automatically come up to you and are like, how are you? Let me know if you can help. And it seemed like these people, the store owners, would maybe nod at us, but just kind of give us more privacy. So that was an observation I noticed.
Sure. So some of our reflections after our trip to Mercado Central were that there were many, many goods and services in one location. We talked about the barber and the bakery. There was also a deli. There was a tailor, like there was actually a guy just sitting behind a desk with a sewing machine, which was kind of interesting. There was a restaurant. There was tons of clothing, and there were also social services like psychologists and those sorts of things there too. And there were other things too. Those are just a few. Like they also had like a sporting goods store sort of thing. It looked very family oriented, as we mentioned. They were always traveling in family groups, and people seemed less rushed, like Melissa said. And I at least felt more out of place there than I did at church. The church felt very, very welcoming, and they were willing to talk to us, and it felt like, and that might just be because I'm used to how church works, kind of, I guess, so I know like that setting, and it seemed familiar, but I don't know, it definitely felt different for sure. But did you have something you wanted to add to that? I think that's our last slide.
No, not really.
Yes, question.
Okay, so you saw lots of groups of people hanging out together as families. Did they need to have all those people together to make a decision on what they were buying?
No.
So why were they hanging out as families?
I think that it just seemed like that was just an important value of their culture. And kind of one thing I guess I didn't talk about, but it like at the bakery there were places where people could sit down, so it kind of seemed like shopping was important, but also just the interactions and the value of spending time with their family was equally important.
So
It was a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, so yeah,
yeah.
that's true.
Okay, so now if a lot of the people that are coming here are single, or young people that come up here, why would a church if you see the importance of this family stuff, why would a church want to consciously position itself to be like a family? Sure.
How they live their whole life.
Mhm.
And that's what would make them feel at home, is if they're a part of the community. So if you really intend to want to minister to them, you need to welcome them into your family.
And I guess I was just thinking as you were talking about that, like if you're immigrants and you're outside of your home community, then a church could be a really important way to kind of recreate that.
Right, and so to become a family and to have that feeling, which you picked up on, is very intentional, but it also just kind of develops it because with Latino people, they just hunger to have a family because that's how they function. And so that's one of the great things when we see the Latinos coming into our culture and into our nation, the values that they bring that way, I'm very excited about. Good work. Okay. The next question. What kind of interaction did you see between cultural groups?
Well, at the church, it seemed like it was just very intentional that they were trying to, well, I think because they'd already created that community within each other, so we knew that they were different cultural groups, but they were treated each other like family, like it felt like they'd intentionally created that feeling.
Okay. I was just gonna say, like, at the church, at least to me, it was really hard for me to see how they interact, or to tell how they were interacting exactly, because it was really hard for me to see when it was multiple cultures interacting, because they'd sort of developed their own culture at the church, I guess.
At the Mercado Central, what kind of interaction did you see between groups that were not Latinos and other groups? Did you see Somalis there? Did you see African American people there? You saw some gringos.
Yeah, well, we kind of mentioned the gringos seemed pretty out of place. Like most of us were very obviously tourists.
Okay.
We saw one African American guy that seemed like he was probably dating a Latina, so he seemed more of an insider. I don't think I really saw Somalis or other cultures besides white and Hispanic, and I guess the one African American boyfriend. And it seemed like they were not, like I felt very separate from their culture at the market. Anything to add?
Okay. Good, thank you. Anything more? Anybody else have questions or comments? Okay, next victims. Sure. The
figure out my Gmail password, someone else can go. It's always logged into my computer.
Someone is logged into your computer?
No, it's always logged in, so I haven't logged in once.
Oh. All right. Gotcha.
No, I don't even. That's not it. Yeah, I'm sure.
Can you grab the microphone?
My name's Ward, and so Rico and I did our cultural encounter together. Rico's home ill today, so it's just me. So I've got a few pictures, and he and I were going to meet this evening to talk, summarize. So I'll share a few thoughts that we processed together as we did it. So we started off in the Phillips neighborhood and went to the one of the Somali malls. Then we went to the lake. It was a Hispanic Latino mall, and then Rico had this idea of, hey, let's go to another mall. So we ventured across town to St. Paul and went to Hmong Village. So
Oh, cool.
so
That's huge.
so this is our locations that we went to. So first, I don't even know how to pronounce that. Carmel Mall? Okay. And this was kind of the entrance and the parking lot, and then you go in, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Was maybe it was under construction. I couldn't tell, but and then we just walked through the mall, and there. I don't know. I came across that. We didn't see any camels, but I
Had me going there for a minute.
I meant to take that one out. But anyway, but it was interesting. One of the observations, we had more pictures in there, but I don't know what happened to them all. But the women and the men were pretty separated. We didn't see any women or men interacting with each other. We were the only folks there who didn't look like we were from Somalia. It was for me. I felt like a minority. I felt very much out of place. I think for Rigo, with his Mexican background, he didn't, it probably wasn't as much for him, but as a white guy there, I felt quite uncomfortable.
Why do you think it would be less for him as a Latino?
I don't know, but that's the impression I got from him. And maybe he's just used to navigating being a minority in an environment where I'm used to walking around and being majority culture. I don't even realize it until I'm in that environment. I think the other thing, the men in particular were louder and in bigger groups, and they were congregating in the cafes and typically in front of a television, watching some world news. All the places we went to, there was a television with guys around it, and they were talking, and they had the world news on. So I think, Rigo had mentioned that he's noticed that theme too, and the world news seems to be very important to them. Let's see, the other things, We didn't see any women or men interacting, and typically most of the shop owners or workers, there were quite a few women who were working in the shops. Men seemed to be working more in the cafeterias. The guys we ate at 2 different places. We were enjoying the food, and so the people we interacted with were they were younger men, and they were very warm towards us. So we felt pretty comfortable as we were interacting with the guys at the cafe, and we asked for recommendations, and we had a great exchange. When we went into another cafe that was more in the corner, and it was a little quieter, but we had a good interaction there too. So yeah, and there were, so I think I've already covered most of that. Okay, so then we went to Lake Plaza. You guys familiar with that one? No? Okay, this is what it looks like. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, I think so. Okay, yeah. So right away when we went in, the whole atmosphere, maybe it's just the architecture of the building, but everything was lighter, more airy. There was a woman with her child here. That was a place where we got some ice cream. But you could, and there was some diversity there. So you can see this African American gentleman was there, and then you can see there were I don't know. I thought I had a picture in it. Hey, there we are. I think Rigo took some of my pictures out, or maybe he put them over the spot. There was a picture of a family that was sitting there eating, which was, and there was a. And the husband and wife seemed to be, they were engaged with each other. They were talking. They were warm towards each other. Yeah, and then we walked around, and Rigo had great conversations with people, and he gave me a little bit of a cultural education and described to me different things that explained things to me in the shop, and the different, even the religious icons and some of the Catholic traditions. So, yes, yeah.
All Latino stores there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it used to be, Rigo said it used to be kind of half Latino and half Somalia, I think, Somalian, he said. But then gradually it became more Latino, and now it's just exclusively. Yeah. So then we went to Hmong Village, and right away we saw, again, family. There were families there. There were women with children. There were even some, there you go. There were even some adolescents kind of out on a double date type of a thing, just, walking the mall and having a great time together. So, which was something we didn't experience, at the Somali Mall. Also, the men and the women were regularly interacting with each other. They seemed to be working pretty hard everywhere we looked. They were working. They were loading things in and out. There was seemed to be good collaboration in terms of how they worked together. The food was great. We just kept stopping at shops. The food was great. So I think
that's one of the benefits of this class. Normally you can gain about 15 pounds if you work at it.
So, yeah, I think I kind of hit on everything. I kind of missed.
Did you see any other people of other ethnic groups at the Hmong village?
A few, but not as, wasn't like the Latino mall. But there were, it was predominantly Hmong people. Yeah. All right. Got it? Got it?
Thank you. Well done. All you guys have done very nicely, or the two groups so far.
Actually, is this your guys's? I'm just gonna. Yeah.
There we go.
I went to the Hmong village too, just happened to last weekend, but I didn't include it in my Phillips tour. All right, so my presentation is pretty short and sweet, but I'll elaborate on each slide just because I made it at work today. And so first place I went a few nights ago was my friend Sienna to La Hacienda right off of Lake and 11th Avenue, just by the 35W Lake Street underpass there. And this place wasn't ever for me just because I've been here so many times.
Great restaurant.
And I always get carne asada. I think this is carnitas or chicken, but I always get a dozen tacos of carne asada, and this time I had to share them. So, and I always get jarritos de mandarina, this orange drink. It's
very good.
Real sugar pop. It's really good. And when we got there, all the staff are Latino and primarily speak Spanish, but the ones who work the teller can speak English with you. But he kind of looked at Sienna, who's actually Ugandan, like, oh, she's going to take the order in Spanish, just assuming that she had darker skin, dark hair. But then I started speaking not in English but in Spanish to him, and he was like, oh, okay, so I guess he's taking or I'll take the order from him. So it took him by surprise. And then I saw two Minneapolis cops there in the corner in a booth. Saw a lot of, like, one family that looked either Lebanese or from Jordan or some like Mediterranean, Mideastern family. And then I saw quite a few African American, a lot of juveniles, groups of just kids or teenagers.
Really?
And I guess others would be Mexicans, probably Central Americans and South Americans there eating together. And usually when there was families, it was small kids with their parents.
Great inexpensive restaurant, and that's where the Latinos eat.
Yep. And there's a place, I guess this is pretty authentic as far as Minneapolis goes, but I was just, for the football game last night, I was at my mother-in-law's, and she says where they're from in Chihuahua, it's like the tacos don't even compare. I mean, like the fresh corn tortillas and everything is just, the meat is all fresh, the produce is just, so I guess for Minnesota, this is as authentic as you're going to get. And then I went to, earlier in the day, it was probably, I probably spent a total of 2 hours in the neighborhood for this assignment, but this was earlier in the day. I had lunch with another friend at Maria's Cafe, which is also a place I like to go to. And just driving by on Franklin, I'm surprised by how much Native American influence there is in that area. there's a Native American, like, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a lot of different social services, not-for-profit organizations. I remember there's even like a center for the blind that is run by primarily Native American people. And then as you go further south of Franklin on, I can't even remember all the cross streets, but before you get over the river again there by those high rises, there's quite a few, I think you pointed out on the bus tour, the halfway houses and the larger alcohol treatment areas as well. So Maria's Cafe is kind of a weird, I think the manager or the management is Colombian, but as far as the people who are inside, it's just a complete smattering. It's like a Walmart inside of, anybody likes to go there.
That's where all the gringos that work for all the nonprofits in the neighborhood have their lunch meetings.
Because the food is it's maybe about $5 more expensive than your regular diner, but the food is really good. And I always have the chorizo sausage scramble with the scrambled eggs. And then sometimes there's live music in the corner, so people feel good when they eat there. And it's not really like a super, it's not really tied down to a certain culture when you go in there, except for maybe the Spanish words that are in the music that are playing, or the South American employees or management. But it's kind of a true feel for that part of the neighborhood, I feel like.
Good job, boss. Colombian pancake with corn in it.
And then since I was full at this point, actually, to get to Maria's Cafe, I live up in Roseville, so I took I parked by my brother-in-law's house. He lives off of Fairview and University there, and I got on the light rail. And instead of taking it to the Twins game or the TCF stadium, I just took it to like a little past Franklin University there, just before it turns south to 94, and then I got on a bus. This isn't a picture that I took from the bus station. It's just a picture of the transit. And then I took it down across Franklin Avenue and got off pretty close to Maria's Cafe there. And it's just kind of interesting to watch. A lot of young people commute with cards. They just scan on. That's the way they commute, with backpacks, headphones. And then you have other people that are, had like a cart or shopping bags with, looks like clothes and maybe their laundry and some groceries and stuff. And then you had some people who looked like they had just been sleeping on the train for a while. And I saw one transit police arrest somebody on the platform at Fairview while I was waiting. It just looked like he was intoxicated or something. And then
Fairview Hospital or Fairview Avenue in St. Paul?
Oh, the Fairview stop on the green line.
Okay.
Yeah, Fairview Avenue. They just call it the Fairway Light Rail platform.
Okay.
And then, let's see, more takeaways. I guess it was a fairly diverse people that ride the bus. I guess it's always more white people when there's a sporting event going on. It seems like that's the trend. I always take the light rail down to downtown for sporting events because I think it's cheap, and I ride for. I used to have a go-kart, and it's pretty cheap if you just put like 6 or 8 rides worth or fares worth a month on the card. Otherwise, now I ride for free. But as far as it's like you said, it being so subsidized. Well, they have to keep it fairly economical for the riders, I think, for it to be a good investment for the community. And I was just realizing how
subsidy for the light rail, it's about $3 a subsidy for every dollar you put into it.
As far as the public dollars go.
Yep.
Okay. And I was just kind of thinking about like the stigma around public transportation. It's something that we've really worked up in our culture. I feel like that's like in Europe, it's not like, or in other cities even, like it's not demeaning to get on a train or a bus, but I think it's something that we have up in our minds, like, oh, I live in a suburb, so I have to drive a car into the cities, and now I pay $25 to park it, and all this stuff, valet parking. I just feel like it's this stigma in our head that we can't really get out of. So I feel like lowering yourself to that, and I actually enjoy it, especially on usually when I have weekends, it's 3 or 4 days off at a time. So if I have like a day of less things scheduled, I'll just take the train. Not necessarily if I'm running errands for myself, but if I'm just going down to the cities, I will. I'm not afraid to get on the train, just because for one, it's not very slow. It actually moves with traffic. sometimes when you're on university, you're like, oh, red light, the train goes by you, and then you catch up to it, and then the train goes by you again. So it's not really, it doesn't feel demeaning to me, but I feel like as Minnesotans and as Midwesterners, sometimes we look down at like, oh, your public transportation isn't something that I want to, be a part of. So.
How much interaction between
Very little.
ethnic or racial groups did you see?
Very little. My brother-in-law worked at Dunn Brothers downtown, and he took a bus and then the train all the way from New Brighton for probably 8 years. He worked at the corporate office there of Washington, and from a young age, that's something he always told me is that transit, beside church, transit systems are like some of the most segregated parts of our city. So, and then just not a whole lot of conversation. If it is, it's from people that get on in large groups and they talk amongst themselves. It's not like people are sitting down and saying good morning and reading the paper with each other and that kind of stuff. So it's pretty quiet. Most people just have headphones on or like Beats or whatever. So I know there's can't remember his name. He does all the those movies where he's like a professional shooter and a professional fighter, but he does those movies where he does all his, I'm trying to think of the name of it right now, I'm blanking, where he like avenges his wife or whatever, or his wife's dog or something, I can't remember, but he's like, his thing is he always takes public transportation, because
Neeson?
John Wick.
Oh.
Who's the actor? Keanu Reeves. It's like his thing. People will see him like with a hoodie and sunglasses in the city that he lives in. I'm assuming it's LA, but so he always I don't think he even owns a car, to be honest. I mean, he probably has drivers. He's a celebrity, he's a movie star, but so I think it's in our culture, I think it's fairly stigmatized because it's not actually a demeaning thing. It's just something that we've created. So.
Good. All right.
Yep.
Nicely done. How are we doing for time here? I didn't bring 7:45. Uh-oh, we're over. Well, okay. Why don't you guys give your presentation next? The three of you. Okay. You guys. Okay. And then we will kind of hustle through that, and then we will. So I've got to. And you've got yours too, right? Okay. Sorry to. Your presentations are excellent, and it. One theme we're hearing is that you didn't see a lot of interaction between groups, and that groups kind of stuck to themselves. Now, did you guys see much interaction?
Yeah, it depends where we went, like, we'll kind of touch on it.
Okay. Did you guys see much interaction?
I did not.
Okay. All right. We'll talk about those. One of the purposes 24 years ago when we started the class was that television has this picture that in the urban center, everybody hangs out and they used to have a boombox on their shoulder and they all talk jive and they all mix. And that there's an urban culture. And maybe in the high schools some. And there is developing more of that in our city. But still, to a high degree, people kind of stick to their own group. Now, there are certain cultures that tend to mix with others more quickly and more easily than other cultures because it's a cultural value they want to do that. You could go back to the beginning of the Viking raiders in the 700s. And every place the Scandinavians settled, either in the Swedes who went to the east or the Norwegians who went to the west, every place they settled in one generation, they intermarried, they adopted the religion of the area, they adopted the language of the area, they adopted the culture of the area, and they disappeared. Well, like the Normans were French-speaking Viking grandchildren. And in 2 generations, they were completely immersed in the new culture. Same thing with Dublin. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm Ben, this is Emily, and this is Jonathan. Yeah, so we went a lot of places, actually. Like, we spent a lot of time, like, trying to observe different cultural groups and, like, how they interacted, and that was the sole purpose of what we were trying to observe, was, like, how are different cultures interacting with each other. And we actually struggled, like, pretty bad with, like, what to, like, take notes on, like, because first we went to, like, or I'm not going to take everybody's spot, sorry. We'll kind of go through, like, first we went to Taco Bell, but then we went to McDonald's, and, you know, it's a common place, and there's a lot of different cultures there. I mean, the majority of the workers seem to be African American, and, you know, there's a Caucasian guy, some Latinos there, and then we were there, and I can't remember if there was there any other ethnic groups there? No, I don't know. But, like, so I kind of talked to the guy working. His name was MJ. Oh, here we go. His name was MJ, and I asked him, you know, hey, like, I just asked him on his experience with interactions with other cultural groups, and, like, if anything stuck out to him. And I thought it was kind of funny because he started talking about McChickens and McDoubles, and but he said it's just like normal, you know what I mean? Like, in that part of it was right on Lake Street, and, like, it's just normal for them to just interact normally with other cultural groups. It didn't seem like different, you know what I mean? And so, but he said, you know, everybody likes McChickens. And if there was a ratio between McChickens and burgers, McChickens would outweigh burgers. But he seemed like very sociable towards like all the different cultural groups coming in, and he didn't distinguish between any of them. He's very outgoing. Something else I noticed, like, just in my interactions with other people, like, when he smiled at people, no matter what their culture was, they would always, like, smile back. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah, but then we went to Taco Bell, and I'll give it over to Jonathan.
Yeah, so we didn't see a whole lot at Taco Bell, so I kind of put them together here. But it seemed like there wasn't a lot of interaction between cultures, just kind of going about their daily lives. But when they had to, they did interact. And so, like, when they were buying stuff at the cash register, they did interact, but it didn't seem like awkward or anything. We talked to a cashier named Mohammed. He was from Africa, and we asked him about what his experience was with interacting with different cultures, and he said it's pretty normal. You just get used to it. He said everyone just, you know, acts like Minnesotans for the most part. And so we did notice a little bit more interaction maybe between people of the same culture, like Hispanics and Africans and Somalians. Maybe talked a little bit more, but it looked pretty much like what you'd see at any other store with mostly white people. Yeah, and then we went to Hope Academy, and
yeah, so we went to Hope Academy today. These are from the internet. I'm sorry I didn't take pictures. But yeah, we observed, actually Jonathan didn't get to go, but we gave him the lowdown. Ben and I went there today, and we got to like be visitors at the school and observe 7th grade girls weight class, and then also 9th and 10th grade boys, just what was the class, history or something like that. And so that was like really interesting to see the like in the girls, they're classic 7th grade girls, and they just want to be with their friends, and that's all. And so but a lot of them, we did notice though that they had kind of separated themselves. So we asked the teacher about like how they were separated, because they were in like different groups of 4, and so he's like, yeah, well, they're 7th grade girls, so some went to like in groups of 3 with their friends, and some went to groups of 2 or whatever, and he like threw them all, like kind of like mixed them up a little bit and evened them out. But for the most part, we noticed that like a lot of like there was like only like 3, so like I think in the school there's like 50% African American, 30% Latino, and 20% white. And so, like, there isn't very many white people in there, so there's like only like 3 white girls in the entire class, and so they were all together though. And then there was like a lot of the African American. There was only one Somali girl that I noticed specifically, but they kind of all just like kind of stayed with their groups of people, but then were forced to mix and still friends with each other. They still talk to each other. But I was also going to talk about that something we forgot was not to the conclusion yet. Also, we didn't take that out. We were gonna, but anyway, so we've like recently in the same area, there was one at Spy Hawks Coffee, and then another interaction was in the. Do you want to describe the accident one?
Yeah, so we were in Vicinity Coffee, which is kind of by Uptown area. It's on Lindale, and you know, it was mainly Caucasian, I think, in there, but there was like an African American and maybe a couple of them, I can't remember exactly, but there was a couple different ethnicities in there. And so like this guy actually got hit by a car, and his dog did too, and he had 2 dogs. One got hit and I think died, and the other one didn't. But like there was several people that ran out like from different cultures like to go respond to that, which was kind of interesting, we thought. Unfortunate, but interesting that all the cultures like ran out there.
And then also at Spy House, we were just like sitting there, just like doing homework and chatting and whatever. And somebody, I'm not sure where he was from, like specifically, but he was a professor. He's from somewhere in East Asia. I didn't catch where specifically. China, probably. He speaks Mandarin, but we just like started talking and were able to like really communicate. But he was really interested in like comparing our culture with his, and then also just like what's different between different like stores, or like he compared like a lot of colors, like, and he was just trying to make connections in his head to like different things that he knows. And then also we bonded because I have Asian cousins, so like I knew some stuff about their culture too, so we bonded over that too. But he was just super interested in getting to know us and like what we do, and like learning about the different schools in the area and stuff like that. So like you notice like there is a separation sometimes, but we kind of noticed too in overall the observation that like pretty much everybody's just used to it. Like they come here and they just, I don't remember the word for it, but like just like, sure, sounds great. That's not the word I was looking for. Something that we talked about recently where they like take on the culture and then like they like look, I don't remember what I was.
Assimilate?
No, it wasn't that I was thinking of, but maybe, yeah, sure. But yeah, so
Acculturate?
I don't know. That's okay.
Mingle?
What?
Mingle?
I don't know, yeah. So they just like learn the culture super fast, and everybody's used to it, and this is the community they live in, and they have to be used to it. So, yeah. That's what we observed.
I would say this too.
Oh. Okay.
All right, let's wrap her up. Are you done?
Yeah, we're done. Yeah.
Good work. Good work. Very creative. All right. Nicely done, you guys. This is a very nice set of presentations. One of the very nicest we've ever had. While you're getting that up, now, if you notice in the front page, that colored sheet that you had at the very beginning, you'll notice there's 7 different colors across the, well, you don't have the second semester, but total there are 7 colors. And the first 2 colors, I think, are kind of a salmon color. And what's the other one? Blue? The first 2 main colors that we go back and forth between. Is it salmon, or what's the other one? Hot pink, okay. Now, that's Unit 1 and Unit 2. And Unit 1 is culture, and Unit 2 is getting comfortable in the city and learning the neighborhood. And we believe that you gotta, if you're going to learn this, you got to experience it firsthand, and you need to, those two have to be wrapped around each other, because you can't really begin to understand a city or feel comfortable until you start learning something about cultures, and you can't learn anything about culture until you're running into the people. So that's why we give you this assignment. Why do you think we stuck you out to go out and explore the neighborhood all by yourselves? Be brave. What? Comfort zone? Comfort zone, sure. How many of you were killed? Anybody here killed? Anybody beaten up? Did you have any times when you felt uncomfortable? That may happen. No? Okay. You did? What happened? What was the deal?
Awkward conversations on the bus, you know.
Okay.
So you kind of you can't leave, you know. It's not like you were involved in it, but just people being obnoxious.
Yeah. That happens. I like the girl with the sticking the tongue out, okay? There must be a story about that.
Aaron Robertson is a part of our team also. So Aaron and I went out on a nice sunny Tuesday and walked Lake Street, and Michael was away during that time, or Mike, and he did a solo Lake Street visit. So we've kind of combined our different observations, but in that part of town you find all types of murals, and this is one of them.
Okay.
So you see different types of people who live in that neighborhood. So this was the second place we went. No, it wasn't. We were more cautious in taking pictures because we just wanted to be sensitive to the people that we were visiting with. So we went to a cake shop first, and it was, she was very friendly. We were alone for a while, and she was talking to us in English with no problem, and we were finding out about all the cakes that she makes. They're custom, artistically designed cakes, and then some Latino people would come in, and she'd immediately go into Spanish, and so she was I thought she was interacting with different cultures very easily. Then we went into Ingebrigtsen's for a short time, and that's the Scandinavian shop, and so I felt totally at home there. Everything was very familiar. And then we went into this bakery. And in this bakery, there was many people who came in and out. It looked like it was a popular place. There was also an African-American man who came in. And so Aaron and I just kind of were looking at the different displays and wondering what they were, and so we asked the person there that was helping customers, and she was explaining about the conchas and all the different pastries, and then eventually we bought something. We bought this is a ginger pig, and this is how do you say it? Concha. One thing that we noticed in the Hispanic stores or the Latino stores, the bright colors. They love colors. Even their food is brightly colored. These are all the foods that we bought. Mainly, Aaron was always hungry. We also had
Bring it all back to the office, but they didn't eat it all.
We shared with our. We also were in the Mercado Central. You can keep going. And in that marketplace, we had hibiscus drink and a rice drink. So we were sampling along the way. But we were also noticing the flyers that were in the stores, advertising different cultural events and activities in the neighborhood.
Good to notice that.
Across the street was a Somali grocery store. There's a couple of them. We went in. The first one that we went into, we walked in, and at the counter, where you pay, was a young man, and he had dark sunglasses on. He kind of looked at us like, "What are you doing here?" We were the only customers in the store, so we walked the aisles and we were looking at the items. Because I spent many years in East Africa, a lot of the foods were very familiar to me. It wasn't not normal, but what wasn't normal was that there was just a few aisles, and then there was this big empty space. And I thought, what is that for? I don't know, because this young man was not visiting with us at all. So we just went there very shortly. But then when we went in here, similar to what some of you had shared, there was the men in the butcher shop talking loudly, and I don't know what they were saying, but visiting a lot. And then there was men at the cashiers, women shopping. There wasn't much interaction between the shop owners and the people buying, the customers. It was just very much of a business orientation, not as friendly as the other shops across the street. I think this is yours. Yeah.
I'll jump in. So I didn't go at the same time, but I noticed some of the same things. When you stepped into the shops, you'd really see such a big variety of different things. This gentleman here is a Latino pastor that partners with our ministry, starts a church, has started a church, and is really doing incredible things. He wrote a book, and it was in one of the stores that they'd noticed. One of the things that I noticed about the stores is you would have right next to each other would be from very different cultures. So there'd be an African-American barber shop and then a Latino, it seemed like a lingerie store or something like that, right beside each other. And then right across the street would be the Somali market. And so location-wise, there's tons of mixing. But in terms of who was in those places, I did not notice much mixing at all. Lupito's salon, as I walked past, had nobody but Latino in it getting their haircuts. It was very much a small, familiar, family, community type small business feel. But I did notice once you started talking about the services that are kind of broader scale, the buses, a lot of people moving past one another, but not interacting in any case. The exception to that was I saw a number of school buses, and I was driving right behind a school bus, and it had which surprised me, the kids were running up and down the aisle, because I don't think my kid's allowed to stand up when he's on his bus going to school. But these kids were like going wild, crawling under the seats, and there was a Somali girl dragging an Anglo girl out from underneath the seats who was smaller. Like there was all sorts of interaction on that bus happening, which I thought was a little unique. But then on the metro stations and the metro bus stops, you'd see people definitely focused on only themselves and not interacting. So there was an Asian man and an African-American man, and they were like, here's the bus stop. And they were like on opposite sides of it, just not kind of making friends. And I noted, okay, is this just social norms, like we don't interact in public, or is this something more going on there? I suspect it's probably a little bit of both. I went through the Somali market as well, and there was only one other non-Somali person there. It was an Asian man getting out of a Mercedes, so I don't know what he was doing, but nobody that was interacting there except for Somali.
Did anyone else see these when they were out? Chicken feet?
Sopa de pato de polla.
When I got home to my Indian Pakistani husband, he said, "Oh, why did you put those? I could have made some good soup with them." We saw interesting colors all over the street. It's not a brown and gray street. It's full of colors, and you have all of these mixing of cultures, like I mentioned earlier, the historical Scandinavian, and then the new cultures that have come into the neighborhood.
Excellent.
At the end of the day, it's the beautiful faces and the individuals created in the image of God that show us the neighborhood to be a place teeming with possibilities. That's
Very good. Very nicely done. Give all yourselves a hand for good presentations. Talking about the bus and so forth, one of the things that oftentimes talk about misattribution, when you've got African American kids in a classroom, the teacher's trying to talk and the kids are responding and talking back. I mean, not mouthing off, but responding by talking. Okay. Oh, the other thing is that we have a little clicker that we can. It's like a remote. Okay, thrill seekers, let's get back to the task at hand. Okay. Now, I'm going to try to zip through this as quickly as possible, and you'll be able to understand it, I think, from the sheet. Test. One. Good. Okay. Now, how many of you are from Pentecostal backgrounds? How many of you are from evangelical backgrounds? How many of you are from a church that's King James only? Okay. How many of you are, let's see, yeah? That's a good question. Both, I guess. And then how many of you are part of an evangelical branch of a mainline church like Presbyterian or Methodist or Lutheran or any of those guys? Or Episcopalian? Okay. And how many of you are part of like a mainline normal church that's liturgical or maybe childhood? Okay, okay. Now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to posit an idea here for you guys to consider, and this is what this is about. We can talk about doctrine, and doctrine is very important, very, very important. And understanding what the Bible teaches and how the Bible works are extremely important concepts. But I think a lot of times, the major part or a large part of what separates denominations or types of denominations from other types of denominations are that group's approach to their surrounding culture. Now, you may disagree with me, but I'm going to throw this out and I want you to think about it. Now, for some reason, this presentation sometimes makes people feel uncomfortable. Now, when I talk about these different approaches to it, there are several that I think can be the Christian response and can be there are genuine Christians that live within that framework of each of 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I think they're all valid responses. And you may find yourself to have lived, you may find that your life experience, either growing up or now or both, may be a combination of things. And so there is no, I can't go to one specific church and say, well, they're a number 2 or they're a number 3. Not too far off from that, but that's shifting all the time as we talk about culture, because culture is constantly morphing. Culture is constantly changing. 50, 60 years ago, this congregation had lots of sermons on no drinking, no dancing, no smoking, no makeup, and that was a very, very, very big deal. And that was almost entirely cultural. 100 years ago, this congregation would have thought that violins were evil, because fiddle music was the music of the devil, and that just was plain naughty. You didn't go to dances. You didn't hang around with people where that kind of music was played. So to bring a violin into a church was kind of questionable. It was kind of like back when we fought the guitar wars. I've gone through the shtick on that. But now, why am I teaching this to you? Because not only do you have to consider your own approach towards our culture, when you go into working with a new culture, how much do you have to pull people out of a culture to make them, I'm going to use the term, real Christians? Now, we work, for example, with one great mission down in Mexico. In that church, because of the intense experience of Mexican Catholicism, they're kind of reticent to even celebrate Christmas or Easter. They are nervous because there's so much emphasis on Mary, because there's so much emphasis on drinking, there's so much emphasis on this or that or the other thing, and so to be a real Christian means you don't do those things, you don't celebrate those ways that your family did. We had kids come through here from Asian families 25 years ago, and it was a real problem because could they still put an orange up on the shelf in honor of great grandma and great grandpa next to the little Buddha? Could they remember that? Parents who said, well, aren't you going to remember me when I'm gone? Aren't you going to respect me and respect our family traditions? So how much do you have to pull somebody out of their culture in order to be real Christians? You know, we have a very egalitarian view. Father, watch over Chumani and please help her to feel better and give her some good rest tonight and make her well. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Would you, one of you guys walk her out to her car? Thank you. No, I want somebody to walk you out this time of night. This time of year we get a new cast of characters around here and so forth. Okay, so we have egalitarian relationships, and men and women have, they share tasks, and women are just as important, and women can work outside the home and so forth and so on. But there are cultures where women and men have very specific roles in their culture. Is that wrong? Do we have to change that? Do we have to go in and say, no, men have to be a real Christian, you have to change diapers? Now, in the parts of the Latino culture, that's unheard of. Although I think it's changing. We locked him out. Can you go up and let him in? So, how do we critique a culture or various parts of a culture or what a culture does, and is it just the stuff we're uncomfortable with? Having to teach the Africans how to sing Lutheran hymns, or the Catholic Church coming into South America and you had to learn Latin in order to really be a real Christian. Can I move you into this chair? Because I can't turn my head real well. I've had neck surgery and I've got titanium and plates and screws and a couple dead guy bones that hold my head on. So it's Fred and Wilma. And thank you, that makes my life a lot easier. So this is what we're going to be talking about is I guess I'm supposed to keep clicking that thing. I don't know that we need to have this up. Well, for the people watching at home, the at-home audience, you notice on the sheet there's this little phrase. It says, in the world but not of the world. And then it says on one side engaged and one side enmeshed. Now you need to have this continuum sheet out in front of you and making copious notes and following along with great zeal and interest, or at least fake it. Okay, so someone described that's the Christian's role, is to be in the world but not of the world. But what does it mean to be in the world and not of the world? And what is the world, and how much of our surrounding, which I guess we'd say it's our culture. So let's look at, now notice there's a line between 1 and 2, and there's a line between 5 and 6. I don't see. I'm sure there are people that are going to be in heaven who are in 1 and who are in 6, but I don't see them as necessarily. Well, I don't see them as valid responses to the gospel because, well, let's talk about it. So, outside of culture, what does this mean? There have been many Christian utopian societies over the last 200 years. The Shakers, Quakers are different, but Shakers, and they had to be celibate, and they would have their dancing, and they would live in communities and so forth. Be cultish groups who have virtually no contact with their surrounding culture. So, like the Amish, it's fascinating to watch how the Amish. We can use power tools, but we can't use a car, but we can accept a ride from somebody with a car. We can't have a phone. It depends upon the group, too. We can't have a phone in the house, but we can have a phone in the barn. And, of course, some of the Amish practice this thing where when the kids are 16 or so, they're allowed to escape the group for a while. And, I don't remember what the name of it is, but, yeah, and they can do all kinds of stuff. I don't know exactly how wild they are, but they can go out and live with the English, as they call them, and decide whether they want to be part of the group. Jehovah's Witnesses are probably the next level out in that they won't celebrate holidays. They won't serve jury duty. They won't. There's a lot of things that they won't serve in the army, and they believe that their kingdom is separate from the worldly kingdom, and they shouldn't be serving in those areas or celebrating any of those holidays. If you take this stand vis-a-vis your greater culture, you really don't. You have an inability to speak to or reach to the culture because of no contact with regular people, whatever they are. It's attractive maybe to people who desire to be different, sometimes wounded people who already feel disenfranchised or unacceptable. I'm going to be rejected anyway, so I might as well be a part of this group. It fits into my worldview. It appeals to people who want an absolute authority, and they don't want to deal with society. They want to go someplace where the truth is, and this is the truth. And so, anyway, and again, it may appeal to maladjusted people for whom being a part of a persecuted fringe group fits right into their personality and their view of reality. There are white power, white identity groups who claim to be Christian, and yet they have so much hate, and we kind of see the people that go to those fringes and feel quite separate. The dress or the customs may separate them vividly, and this is part of the identity, much like how Jewish people, would wear certain costumes, or Muslims wear the women have to wear certain clothing. When you went to the Somali Mall, did you see men's clothing stores at the Somali Mall much, or many men's clothes? No, because they can just go to Kmart. But the women, they have to buy clothes that fit their culture. Yep, then they would have to go someplace where that is. I think it's just people that want to wear their traditional, clothes. It would be like an American wearing blue jeans in Europe in the 1960s or 70s, 60s probably or 50s. They were unheard of. Okay, so if you're going to take this idea, if you're going to take your idea of society is to be out of it, to be a part of this group, you have to turn your back on all of society. Obviously, it's pretty ineffective in outreach. You don't see the Amish growing by leaps and bounds. You basically have to be born into the Amish society to be, I don't know if they have converts coming in, but it's not very, very often. All right, so that's number one on the left-hand side. Anybody have any comments? Okay. Sure, monastery would be much like this, and wouldn't be necessarily the teaching is so weird, but one One of my travel memories that is the most amazing to me, we did a Holy Land tour in 1995. And I scheduled this tour in such a way, created it in such a way that everything you ever wanted to see in the Holy Land and Egypt and Rome, you could kind of kill it off in one 10-day tour. And it was quite amazing. But one of the things I definitely wanted to do, I wanted to stop at the Mount Sinai Monastery. Because this monastery was famous because when the most important New Testament text was found there. And, but it's almost impossible for us to understand. But, you know, we have ideas of what, you know, the most studly Christians are like in our given day. You know, maybe Bill Bright or Billy Graham or somebody like that. But there were times after Christianity became legal in the 300s, in the 400s, the idea of becoming a desert hermit was the most cool way to live out your faith. And they would go off to the most distant places. There were a lot of monasteries in the Holy Land, in just terrible places to get to. And this place out in Mount Sinai, I have been in American deserts and a couple of different parts of the country. And this desert is nothing. When you talk about Sinai and where Moses was with the people of Israel, there's nothing there. They got a real deal on rocks and sand when they built it. There might be one little grass plant here and one little grass plant over in the corner over there, maybe 50 feet apart, and there's just nothing in between it. It is as desolate. It's like Mars. And they went out there onto what they thought was Mount Sinai. And they thought this raspberry bush was the burning bush. Anyway, they lived out there from 400 till today. They were there during all the years of the Egyptians and the years of them being the Mamelukes and so forth, and the Turks and all of the various groups that have come through the Holy Land. And they had walls. They even built a mosque in the corner of their monastery so that the Muslims wouldn't destroy them. And a lot of the monks would go up on top of the mountain and they'd have a little cave and they would almost never leave there. Maybe a little food was brought up for them, but a lot of times they'd fast for, a tremendous amount of their time. And, in complete silence, and pray and pray and pray and study Scripture. And then when they died, here's the kicker. I've got a picture of the ossuary. Every monk that's ever died there, who spent their life living there, then died there, and they put their bones out until everything had rotted away, and every skull and every shin bone and every elbow bone or whatever you've got, all the bones of every monk for the last 1,500, 1,600 years are in that room. Over here, there's a pile of skulls. Over here are all the thigh bones. Over here, and so forth. And you go past that and you go like, what? It's just so unreal. But that's how Christianity was lived out culturally or anti-culturally in the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries and even today. But that's what it means to be a real Christian, okay? And they felt they had to completely separate themselves from society. Was that valid Christianity? I don't know. Now, a word we haven't heard much, I think the media has forgotten it. 20 years ago, we heard of fundamentalists versus evangelicals. And fundamentalists come from a time in the Reformed Church of split between the liberals, 1890 liberals, 1900 liberals, which is a group, and the fundamentalists. And there was a pamphlet called The Fundamentals. It was about 20 points, plenary verbal inspiration, and so forth. And like the church over here on the corner, they are fundamentalists. King James only, no guitar music, only church music that was written that way, and so forth. And or it could be fundamentalists, like snake handlers down south, but they were one click further to the right. This actually should maybe be kind of switched around from right to left, but it's too hard to do it. Anyway, they were much more literalists, and they were 7-day creation and that kind of stuff. Now, certainly 3 would also have some of that. Beliefs like that, but it was very, women have certain roles, women have to have their head covered, et cetera, et cetera. And that type of Christianity has kind of blended in, or at least the culture sees it as the same as evangelicals, and they just use the term evangelicals. But also, standing that far apart from culture, younger pastors the last 30 years have kind of moved away from that. So you don't have as many of the deep fundamental churches that you had 30 years ago, because, I don't know, well, let's take a look at this. So on edge of culture, the typical U.S. fundamentalist having very little contact with the outside world, but not cultish. They're Christians, they have a church, they are, but it's not the same as an evangelical church. The world is mostly a place to work or to shop and so forth. Culture is distrusted, the world is distrusted and seen as alien. Now, might be kids in homeschooling. Now, there's nothing wrong with homeschooling. But that may be true further up the continuum here too. Maybe kids in small Christian academies. There's a distrust of the larger evangelical Christian schools. They've got dances, things like that, and public schools, of course. Distrust of secondary education. They might have their own, very sectarian Bible schools. Pillsbury Baptist down in Rochester would maybe be something like that. That it's gone now. But the idea that those schools are just too liberal, they're too worldly, and that we need to be more separate. We need to be more the chosen few. Might be a tendency to see a very narrow group as being saved, often those of that particular group. One of the churches in the neighborhood here 20 years ago wouldn't meet with or do anything with any other churches because they weren't sure if they were saved, and they didn't want to sully their people. Political views may be a bit eccentric, various conspiracy theories, etc. Again, one of the fundamentalist churches here got deep into the one world order stuff and spent a lot of time as a church dealing with some of the conspiracy theories. But worship might be only traditional or organ only. Now, for example, there's a real right-wing Catholic group that says you can't really worship unless you're worshiping in Latin. Now, they might fit in this area. Now, you don't see those as, primitive Baptists, but they are, that's how they do, it's the same thing. We were down in the very southeastern corner of Tennessee a few years ago, and one Sunday we visited a primitive Baptist church, and this church had like 15 rules of to be a church member. You listen to the leaders and don't gossip and don't talk badly about people, and this was all posted on the back of the piano. The piano was there, and they had a all of their singing had to be a cappella, had to be without any accompaniment. But they'd work themselves up to the point that they moved if there was special music with a soloist, they would move the piano in. I said, what happens if you have a concert? Well, we turn all the chairs around and we put the piano up on the other end, and then it's not up at the church part. Okay, well, this is kind of an interesting game you're playing within your own heads. What is this? Well, that piano music had been seen as too worldly. But they could have it on the other end of the building for concerts, and if somebody had a solo they wanted to sing, then you could have it in the sanctuary, but you couldn't sing with it. You couldn't have it while you were while you were singing your hymns, because the hymns had to be without accompaniment. Okay. So it might be only gospel music or only traditional music or whatever the group is, or particularly defined from a particular era that spawned the group or the location. You think of some of the groups that, the ethnic congregations. They could be in several different places here. But the approach to culture, the approach to society is much like the hippies of the 60s. Tune in, turn on, get into the group, identify with the group, and then just drop out of society. Distrust of and lack of contact with the outside world limits the ability to reach culture and witness. Culture itself is seen as the enemy. Okay? All right. Now let's take this one click further. And I would say this is more like, historically, like the last 50 years of the evangelical churches. So whatever that is. That would help. Thank you. Remind me about that, okay? All right, now this is where it kind of gets fun, in that this is a typical U.S. evangelical approach to create a parallel Christian universe. Now we're going to, again, forgive me, not much different from the mainstream, but it's still the Christian version of culture. So, we go to popular Christian schools, and there's a strong Christian focus. My kids went to Concordia Academy, or there's, Minnehaha Academy, or some of these large schools, lots of kids. Strong Christian focus, but they're patterned greatly after the public schools. They've got dances, they've got clubs, they've got football teams. The parallel Christian school universe, the parallel organization universe, you have Awanas or Pioneer Clubs instead of Boy Scouts. It's much like it, or Girl Scouts, but it's going to be, you're going to memorize Bible verses for badges. Emphasis on private Christian colleges. Okay. The private Christian colleges like Bethel or Northwestern or Wheaton and so forth. We don't trust psychology, but somebody like James Dobson, Christian psychology is okay. And so you have a separate form. And if you go into, Lifeways, it's the bookstore is about 1/4 books, and the rest is Christian cookbooks, Christian knickknacks, precious moments. Now what? No, I don't want to change the color. Come on, I just want to get going with the show here. Okay, you got the Jesus Loves Me. At the checkout, you don't sell gum, you sell Testa mints. They sell rulers, but they've got Bible verses on it because all the kids in school are going to be converted if they read the rulers. I don't know. It's Christian pop music, which sounds just like the music on the radio 5 years ago. Acceptance of much of culture, but mirroring it in a baptized way, accepting what you can. We're not that weird. We're a lot like our neighbors, but we have, you accept much of culture, but mirroring it in this baptized way, and maybe more able to speak to culture, but yet very little touch with society, often unable to find areas of witness contact with culture, because everything is separate. Now, what would the number 2 group say about the number 3 group? How would they criticize them? They're so much more worldly. They're sellouts, yeah. Okay, so let's go one more click. And this we'll call evangelical, but involved with culture. Now, this is a typical U.S. evangelical or a turned-on mainline Christian, strong Christian identity, but involved in their culture at the cost maybe of separation, sense of separation, critically using the structures of culture to reach culture. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, let's try it again. So, it might mean attending public schools. So you'll get hardened up and tough, and you can stand on your own 2 feet. But self-consciously as Christians, speaking up in class, learning to be bold in the hostile culture. But the kids on the front line can be at risk. It might be teaching in public schools. There's an awful lot of Christians that teach in the public schools as a witness and as a way of sharing their faith. Got to be very careful. But if you set it up so the kids ask you questions, you can share, which is what my wife did. Choosing to have involvement in the community, groups such as Lions or 4-H or Scouts, as a channel for evangelism. It's the typical. Now, this is the interesting thing. This is the typical approach of missionaries when they approach a new culture. Is to go into the place, to go into the country, and to try to learn the culture and go as deeply, like Hudson Taylor, wear the clothes, try to become involved, create relationships, and go as deeply as you can. Unafraid of study of secular psychology or medicine or science, but done critically with the Bible as the highest authority. Use of media and arts and fashion, all within the cultural norms, but with the Christian conscience to fit into culture. Do 15-year-old Christian girls have to dress weirdly? Do boys have to dress weirdly? This is a concern, I think, for all women, and maybe to some degree for men too, but women especially. What does it mean that I'm going to dress like a Christian? Does it mean all skirts down to the floor? Does it mean no makeup, like this church taught? Does it mean, how far can you go into the cultural norms without somehow betraying what you believe in? I never raised any daughters, and I'm not a girl, and I don't know how to answer that one. I can see things and say, yeah, that might be over the line, but anyway. This would be acceptance of much of culture, very little attempt to build a parallel Christian culture, instead trying to be critically open to using culture as a way of witness and to be a Christian within that culture. Oh, that one there? Okay. I haven't taken the time to read that. Why is it coming up? Oh, all right. All right, so a 4 would be acceptance of much of culture, little attempt to build a parallel Christian culture, instead tries to be critically open to using culture as a way of witness, attempt to be culturally fluent but faithfully Christian. Now, is that a valid thing? Now, what would 2 say about 4? Okay. All right. What would 3 say about him? Well, and yeah.
I think with all of these, there's like the slippery slope argument. Like the closer you get to the world, I guess it's dangerous. You're getting closer to danger. So I think like 2 would probably be like, well, we want to be holy, so we want to be as far away from.
But why wouldn't you want to be a 1 then?
Well, yeah, I guess 1 would.
If you're going to be real,
so
well.
Probably all of them would give that critique of the next one.
Well, these are very valid questions. How do you live it out? How much of that is cultural? Wearing blue jeans to church. 40 years ago, a pastor of this congregation would have never showed up to teach a class or showed up at church in jeans. And I've got to say that I rarely, at St. Paul, I would never show up on a Sunday morning in jeans. Our people do now. 30 years ago they didn't. But I probably wouldn't show up even for meetings or that kind of stuff dressed like I am tonight. For me, it's kind of fun. Anyway, but interestingly yet, as we've learned since Lausanne in '74, as we learn about culture, 4 is really quite definitely the approach that missionaries most generally take. Janet, does that sound, comment on that? Right. Yep. Right. Yeah. Well, and what we're talking about here too is a decision to live at point 2, 3, or 4 as your way of living your life out as a Christian. This is somebody who's conscious of their Christianity and what that would be like, and making the choice to do that. Yep. You bet. Yep. Yep. Unfortunately, there's a lot of grayness. That's why it's a continuum. And those are decisions we make, either decidedly or that we just slide into them. 40 years ago in this congregation, it would have been taught and held by probably most of the people that women should not work outside the home. Now, I don't think that this congregation, well, I think a lot of congregations, a lot of evangelical congregations, a lot of the evangelical wing of Lutheranism or even Methodism and so on, there were a lot of teachings going around because the world was changing fast. And nowadays, well, again, it kind of depends upon what it takes to have a roof over your head, and how are you going to live that out? And those are hard decisions to make. But is that a biblical? The books that were out then, when I look at them now, I don't see a whole lot of biblical stuff. I see a lot of cultural stuff, but I don't see a lot of biblical stuff as to how that was made. Is it wrong for a woman to stay home? Absolutely not. It'd be fabulous. It would be great for the kids, and and I think women, they need to chart their own course. I don't think there's one Christian way to do it. Okay, let's go to 5 and 6, and these aren't too far apart. Number 5. Okay. Culturally captive Christians, typically, but they're Christians. Typical U.S. Protestant mainline mirrors the social beliefs and the standards of its culture. I think of small towns in Minnesota 20, 30 years ago. You either were a member of the Catholic Church or a member of the Lutheran Church or a member of the Methodist Church, and whether you went there or if you knew that was your church to stay away from, everybody was tied to a church, and they all considered themselves to. I mean, their family's been a part of that. What else are they going to be? They're not Muslim. They're not Jewish. Yeah, sure, we're Christians. Acceptance of the cultural norms in arts, entertainment, political correctness tries to bring some form of Christian witness in society, but with little focus or really an idea of what is uniquely Christian. tends to mix the social agenda of the political fashion, left or right, and see it as identical to Christian agenda, either whether it's in the South and the solid South and what everybody believes, that's what it means to be a Christian. That's the Christian worldview. So society's agenda of being nice at a given time dictates the ethical teachings of the church and the agenda of its policies. Attempt to live as daily as a Christian within society, you could say they do that, their understanding of it, but uncritically and accepting of most current trends. Celebrate Christian holidays, have church membership maybe, but rather inarticulate in witness and understanding of faith. So enmeshed in culture that they may have little ability to be critical, work for change. Discipleship is hard, as is the lure of anti-Christian culture. As the lure of anti-Christian culture is powerful from within, and there's a little sense of otherness or Christian identity. Okay, so that would be nominal Christianity, maybe we'd call it. And it has been very common, but those people are dropping away in this generation. And finally, we get secular culture. Now, again, this would be total identification and participation with whatever portion of the U.S. culture they think is theirs. Now, our culture has fragmented compared to the 1950s, where everybody was the same, and of course everybody was white because that's all you saw on TV, and everybody had the same secular values. You might see people going to church on Thanksgiving or something, but there was no Christian content. The brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. Anyway. Now, it's increasingly hostile to most forms of Christianity. There are many secular cultures, no longer one standard, American TV culture. Political correctness and secular multiculturalism, be inclusive, non-judgmental. Boy, if there's one value in America today, non-judgmental. Yeah, tolerance, unless you happen to have some belief of any kind. Then anyway, American civil religion used to dominate our American culture, but that's been replaced with a new secular piety, based on relativism. Non-judgmentalism are the norm. You cannot say anything judgmental. You have to. You have to. There are some things that are just. If you're going to be a good person today, okay, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, it meant that you went for temperance, and have you ever seen The Music Man? The show The Music Man, and you've got all those little ladies and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and the good people were the ones who were in favor of that, and they looked down their noses on the people that weren't that way, and so on. Well, today, if you're going to really be the best, you should at least be a vegetarian. If you're going to be conscientious, unless you're a vegan, and then you're morally superior to okay. So knock knock. Vegan, and I'm better than you are. Anyway, and you have to recycle everything, and the more you recycle and the less garbage you throw out, that makes you morally superior. And if you drive a Prius, you're a little more morally superior than somebody that drives a Civic. And of course, a Civic driver is far morally superior to whoever drives the pickup truck. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's that cafe on 35th Street there? Anyway, it's just like every yard sign and every. My dad was a farmer. I love locally buying local food, but it's like they harp so many things. And if you do it, it's not that they support that. It's if you don't do it, it's like.
Well, we have a culture when just watch TV and watch the political correctness. Now, is it wrong to be a vegan? Is it wrong to recycle your garbage? Of course not. It's wonderful. Well, I don't just recycle. I wash out my plastic bags and reuse them. I am morally superior. Well, I mean, this is the new piety. It's a secular piety, and it's I don't know, but that is it's kind of like a religion in that it gives people a moral sense of superiority. But it's debatable whether one could be a Christian and not have any sense of differentiation from culture. Here, there's an uncritical acceptance of whatever cultural beliefs are prevalent. Now, again, there's no hard and fast lines between all of these, but I'm trying to lay out the idea of different approaches to culture. And I think you can see that different approaches between, say, fundamentalist and evangelical and evangelical involved in culture are all making decisions, and they're all thinking things through. They're thinking them through logically. They're thinking them through emotionally. It's a question of identifying with a particular group or a particular agenda. So when we go and we try to share Jesus with somebody that's from an entirely different culture, what would it look like for them to become, quote unquote, real Christians? Do they have to look like you? Do they have to act like you? Do they have to give up their music? Do they have to? I don't have an answer for you. But these are the things you have to look at. You know, in today's culture, if you're witnessing to a young couple and they're living together, do they have to break up before they can receive Jesus? You know, how, and that seems to be now the norm. So, you know, these are really hard questions, but these are the things that, you know, that we face. You know, what does it mean? So, what's your reaction? Where do you think you, yeah. But we're going to protect our kids. We're not going to send them to that school. Of course, now what this means is Christians are losing all, evangelical Christians are losing all impact, all ability to change or have any impact on the public schools. You pull out, then all of a sudden, anyway, go ahead. Yeah. Well. Well, but they're protecting their family, they're protecting their kids, they're living as shining examples. Well, yeah.
Not to totally counter that, but I think that it's like you could grow up. I grew up homeschooled. I definitely have seen like homeschoolers that have more of the attitude of like number 4.
Sure. And oftentimes very brilliant and very well educated and so forth. Yeah. Yes. Yes. That's why I say these things. These are caricatures. Yeah. Good point. I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that a living example of that was one of my groomsmen at our wedding. He went to Washburn and grew up like 38th in Chicago. And his mom was a pastor at the Assemblies of God Church in Bloomington. And so like he was raised in such a more, he accepted culture in so many different ways just because of where he lived and his friends on the football team and all that. But then at home it was like Awana, you know, like, or go away to summer camp in North Dakota, you know, music camp or whatever, you know, just like, and it was so many ways. It's so just weird how like his family made these acceptable things, but then like, oh yeah, listen to rap music and go play football, it's fine, you know. So it's like, it's crazy how like even like smaller groups in this, different churches and families make their own little categories of what's acceptable. I think it's very individualized because people kind of like they find out where they're comfortable.
Well, and that's it. What makes it comfortable? What makes it comfortable? Why do we find that comfortable? And you know what? And how do we live as to be in the world but not of the world? And those are really hard decisions to make. But you make those decisions every day in the TV shows you watch, in where you spend your money, and how much time you're praying, who you pray for, what you pray for. Might work out in the way that you vote next week. Make sure you get out there and vote. A big, important year. Get yourself in there and get registered and so forth and so on. That's, you know, Paul thought his citizenship was extremely important. Okay, have you all figured out exactly where you're at in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? No, I hope you don't. I don't want you to pigeonhole. But as you make decisions, as you're thinking about this, as you're dealing with people of other cultures, keep in mind what would it look like to live in their culture or their immigrant culture and live as Christians? And what would this cost them in their culture? You know, Latin America, it is very common. Domestic abuse is just very, very common in many parts of Latin American culture. Can you be a Christian and smack your wife? Well, I don't think it's right, but at the same time, that is a culturally dependent thing. Maybe. I don't think Christian, you know, husbands love your wives as you would your own body, but in a culture where that's seen as good for the family and keeping things in control, would you be seen as the enemy of good order? I think if I was a pastor in that setting, I think I would have to mention that as, you know, but not make it the center of what I'm preaching. But, you know, these are the things to think about. Could you know, if you're in parts of Africa where they practice female genital mutilation, could a Christian go along with that? And of course, then there's the old one. What, you know, if you become a Christian and you've got 3 wives, you have to put 2 of them away and they have to turn to prostitution and your children become outcasts living in the dump? Or do you stay with the 3 wives, but you're not put into leadership? Or, these are hard questions. These are cultural questions. But it comes down to Jesus and people's lives. So, okay, we're going to need to take about 2 minutes here. And I hope I haven't made any of you too uncomfortable. But I want you to think these things through as it's kind of we've been thinking about culture kind of this way, and now this is the kind of this way, and that how do we understand all this stuff about culture, but how do we live it? So, okay. Let's take a couple of minutes and stretch or whatever you need to do, and then I'm going to talk to you about one of the assignments coming up. Cheryl, are you back there? Is Cheryl in the back room? Is Cheryl in the kitchen? No, Cheryl was here earlier, but I was busy doing what I was doing, and I lost track of whether she was here or not. Okay. Now, I've got other goodies here. Now, there are 2 assignments coming up, and we used to do them very separately. After we're done with this, later in this month, we're going to have the next color unit, I think it's green, called Entrepreneuring the Church, or ETC, which is kind of like everything else you've ever needed to know about how to go start on bare dirt and build a tiny ministry. Now, it may go a lot further than that. We've had people go on from here and start churches. We've had people start a lot of little ministries, or just get a couple of friends together and work for a few months and take care of a need, and then they disband and maybe find the next project. So what I want to, next week we're going to talk about the ministry assessment. You're going to all sign up to go out and spend a couple hours at a local nonprofit that we think does a nice job. School, a church, a people care ministry, and so forth. We've got 4 groups coming in next week, and you will be able to hear their elevator speech. We give them each a very short period of time to tell you this is the most fantastic, most wonderful ministry. And you're going to go out and you're going to learn, you're going to take a bunch of questions, and you're going to see whether or not they actually work that way or not. You're going to learn a little bit about the nuts and bolts. Now, we used to give that assignment after we had taught you the Entrepreneuring the Church thing. Instead, we're going to introduce it, because as we do this, as we've changed around and been working with the colleges and so forth, we kept hitting the problem that nonprofits are so incredibly busy in December. It's the end of their fundraising time, and it's just incredibly busy. So we're going to give it a little jump on that starting next week. But now, what I want you to do is to pull out tonight the sheet, one of many that has MissionShift on the top, immersive learning experiences. We're going to make you all Baptists. No. That was a little Lutheran joke there. I see, okay. Yeah, there's a Baptist pastor and a Lutheran pastor arguing about baptism, and the Lutheran pastor said, Baptist pastor said, we got it all the way underwater, all the way whole thing. And Lutheran pastor, what if I just have water up to here? And Baptist pastor says, no, that's not. What if I have just water up to here? No, that's not enough. What about water up to here? No, how about here? Nope. What about here? Nope. No, the whole got to be immersed. Well, what about, so all the way to here, right? He said, yeah. So this isn't enough, but this is, right? And he said, yes, it's got to be. He said, well, good, because that's the only part we do. All right, anyway. Don't throw anything. Okay, we learn best by immersing ourselves in new situations and taking the time to reflect on and write about those experiences. Now, again, in all these things, when we talk about the history, when we talk about what you've just experienced going out on the street, if you just go out and at face value experience these things, you're not getting an education and you're not really learning. To learn, to have an education, is if you have these experiences and you ask why. And particularly if we can teach you to ask why 3 times deep. Why is that? Well, why is that? Well, then why is that? And if you can gain the habit of asking when you see something, why is that? Why are those people acting that way? Why is this here? Why is this at this place? Why, et cetera, et cetera? Why are these people living in this area? Et cetera, all the whys. The more that you can teach yourself to ask why and seek it through, and just keep it in the back of your head. And a lot of times God will give you those answers. He'll pop something into your head, or you'll encounter something. But that's how you build a world inside your head. And that's what an education is when you keep asking the word why, okay? This is not taught as a vocational school. Nothing wrong with a vocational school, but we're not teaching you how to run a lathe or run a computer program. What we're trying to do in this thing is teaching you to think a certain way, and that is to be curious. To be curious. If we can, to teach people to be curious about how the city works and how to do ministry, that's the greatest gift we can give you. All right? If you weren't curious, you wouldn't be here tonight. That's a good first step. All right. So students will be required to do two immersive learning experiences during the semester. You can pick any two from the list below, or if you come up with something equally creative, ask me and we'll okay that too, probably. You can do this with pairs of two people. We always did this individually, but some people were just too scared to go out and do these things by themselves. So if you want to do two, that's okay. But the more people, the more impact you have on the situation. You're less of a fly on the wall, and you start creating your own wake, we'll just say. Okay, so you can do this in pairs. In order to count, there must be two different and separate experiences. All right, 1, visit a soup kitchen and receive a meal. Do not serve a meal, but rather experience what it's like to share the same social status as a homeless person. That's kind of embarrassing. They serve a supper over here at St. Stephen's most nights. You got to do your own research and find out when this is. House of Charity down on Park Avenue, right downtown. They serve lunches every day, free. All you got to do is walk in. They'll give you a nice lunch. Questions for reflection. How does it make you feel to be in a place where everyone assumes that you are poor and homeless? What do you observe in the way that people act or portray themselves? Is there a gap or a distance between the volunteers and the people receiving a meal? How can that gap be bridged? Are the volunteers friendly? Are they condescending? How do the recipients seem to respond? Are they grateful? Are they sad? How would you feel if you were in their position? You are. Visit an ethnic church where you are the minority. Questions for reflection. What is it like to be in a church with a different tradition from your own? What unwritten rules do you observe? How do the roles of men and women differ from in your tradition? If the church service is in a different language, how does that affect your ability to worship? Can you worship? What's it like? Okay. Ride a metro transit bus for a minimum of 2 hours. Light rail or whatever. Questions for reflection. What's it like to take a city bus to downtown Minneapolis or St. Paul? Good job on you guys. Who is the group that did that? You guys. Okay. Nice job. Nice job. Yeah. Okay. You got to do that. You've already counted that for one thing, so you can't count that for the. Sorry about that. Okay. Are the schedules confusing? What if you didn't have a computer or a phone to figure out where you're going? Would it be easy to get lost? How does that make you feel? Imagine yourself as a refugee who doesn't speak fluent English. Would you feel frustrated or overwhelmed? What happens if you take the ride and you get to the end and there's no bus coming back the other way? What are you going to do? You know, that's why a timetable gets to be important. Okay. Visit a core city hospital and wander around. Pretend your family member is sick and you're trying to visit them, in case people ask you, because people may ask, what are you doing here? So they're security people. I wouldn't lie. I would just tell them I'm taking a class. You can show them your assignment if you wish. I think that would be better if you're dealing with. Okay, questions. Yeah. Questions for reflection. Imagine you're from a different culture. Is it easy to find where you're going? Do the urban hospitals look as nice as what you're experiencing? I think Hennepin County General or Hennepin County Medical Center would probably be the best place to go. What if you didn't know the language well? How would you ask for help? Who would you ask for help? How does that make you feel? Okay, here's one I know you're going to hate. Eat in an ethnic restaurant and order something you have never eaten before. Ask your server to recommend something the restaurant specializes in that you haven't eaten before. Questions for reflection. Are you anxious about not choosing your own food? Can you read the menu and understand what's in the dish? If you couldn't read the menu and didn't know what something was it easy to ask? What if you didn't read or speak the language? Would it be easy to ask what things are? Are the other diners from a similar ethnic group? Are they all gringos? These immersive, and by the way, Taco Bell, it's a great place to go and observe people. But Taco Bell ain't Mexican. It ain't Latino, okay? It's Tex-Mex, maybe. Okay, these immersive learning experience reports can be done in any order and will be due on November 26th. November 26th, that's towards the end of this month. Each intensive immersive learning experience will consist of a two-page type paper based on the provided sheet. You must write one paragraph for each of the 5 things you learned. A total of 2 immersive learning experiences will be done. Now, here you have, we were doing this with the colleges online. And most of you are not parts of Northwestern, University of Northwestern. And so you've got this sheet. This is a print off of what was online. Don't worry about typing on this sheet, but these are the questions, okay? So 5 questions, put your name on it and so forth. And part 2, what implications will these insights have in your day-to-day life and what potential impact could they have on your chosen profession? Part 3, bottom line, my most important key takeaway from this is, okay? The 5, you're supposed to come up with 5 things that you've learned. So, this is the type paper. Yeah. It doesn't have to be fit into those little boxes, but that's the format of the typed paper. So it should be about 2 pages, and he says about Tom Olson put this together last year, about a paragraph for each of those. So he says 2-page paper based on the provided sheet. Must write 1 paragraph, 4 to 5 sentences for each of the things you learned. So not just like, I don't like Chinese food. By the way, you will find that most of the Vietnamese restaurants are actually run by Chinese/Vietnamese. That they're people that came from China, and they are they were the ones that got out of Vietnam oftentimes the first, because they had some money and they had some background in the cities and so forth. And then the Vietnamese also did very well coming out compared to the Hmong who were living in dirt-floored thatched huts and so forth. They had only received, they never had a written language until the 1950s, and they were shooting bows and arrows until we gave them M16s. So. All right, anybody have any questions about this assignment? This is not meant to be terribly, terribly painful. You'll notice you have no reading assignment for, or wait, no, yes, I'm sorry. This week you do. This week you're supposed to kill off Patty Lane, chapters 10 through 12. Please take a look at that. All right, now, we covered a lot of ground tonight. Again, I want to congratulate you for doing a good job on your presentations. Thank you. Thank you. You took it seriously. And I hope you learned something. I hope that it was you had some aha moments, because that's when it's fun. What did you, from the experience, what did you take out of it that was an aha moment? What was the best thing you learned? Let's not all speak at once. Every Friday I'll hit Sam's Club. I hit the same 3 or 4 gas stations. And I think of myself as adventurous, but of the ethnic restaurants in the neighborhood, I probably frequent 5 of them more than anything else. And now I'm missing being retired because I don't get my ethnic restaurant fixes. But anyway, good. Other comments? What did you learn? When I look at you, everybody looks down because they don't want to be called on. Yeah. Now, were you in this? Did you go to the Somali Mall at all? You did. Okay. Now, in all those women's clothes, what colors were highlighted, and why do you think that was? What kinds of colors did you see in that clothing? Maroon, purple, yeah. Probably originally that was the case, yeah. And olive green, dark burnt orange kind of colors. Now, anybody here to ever talk about color as to what people with different skin colors, what they're supposed to wear? I understand redheads are never supposed to wear pink. At least that's what my mother-in-law always said. She was a redhead. But who wears those kinds of colors best? Yeah, people with an olive or a darker skin tend to. Oh. But I'm a winter. I'm a spring. I don't. Do people still do that? I don't know. Anyway, okay. What else? Okay. Good work. Okay. What else did we learn? Good comments.
I didn't really learn this, I guess, but I really liked Hispanic worship. Maybe I liked that, I guess.
Well, Pastor Howell is a dear friend. I've worked with him now for, I don't know, what is it, 17 years, something like that. And he's a great blessing, great church. If my wife spoke Spanish, I think we would join that church. Pero ella no puede hablar español. One thing that I thought of several times in your presentations was, when I first came here in '88, the predominant cultures on Franklin and on Lake Street changed about every 2 to 3 years. They kept changing. But for about 15 years now, it's been primarily Latino and Somali. And so that's become like the shopping region for those. Plus, we've got new people, new Somalis, new Latinos coming into this neighborhood all the time. It'll be interesting to see if this mall that was mixed Somali and Latino, and now it's all Latino. That's interesting. Other. All right, we've got 2 minutes before we close here. Remember, we asked you to please befriend me on Facebook, and please post on your Facebook site something you learned tonight. And if you didn't share we've got your papers too to get in. Thank you. Please take your papers, pass them to the right, and. Yep, that's good. So to pull all these strings together, we're talking about culture and getting comfortable in the neighborhood. So all these various pieces, think of how, in your own time, or you're laying in bed and can't get to sleep, think about all these different weird pieces. All these weird pieces have fit together and fit them together in your head. Why did we teach this? Why did we teach that? Why did we teach this? Everything is planned, but I may not have done a very good job yet of pulling all the strings together for you. And if you have questions, why in the world did we waste time on that? Let's talk, but it is all planned. So anyway, good. Father, thank you for a good, very, very good night tonight. Ask you to protect us and bless us as we go, and continue to just make that hunger for the love of these immigrant people and of the city burn in our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Did it. That's all, folks. Night. I can't do Courtney.